Hello and welcome to the Whitehall Sources podcast, where we take you inside politics at Westminster. I'm Calum Macdonald. Hello. And also on the podcast, Kirsty Buchanan, who was a special advisor to the Prime Minister Theresa May. Hello, Kirsty.
Hello, Calum.
And Joe Tanner, political strategist. Hello, Joe.
Hello, I'm currently masquerading as looking a bit Bob Blackman-like. I'm wearing a headset for today's pod, which is very unusual for me.
A new development for Joe Tanner.
He used to get a lot of stick, didn't he, during lockdown for wearing a headset as if he was going to... They talked about him being like commander or air traffic controller or something. So I'm doing a bit of that today. I'm
From mopeds to air travel with Joe Tanner.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Kirsty, how are you doing? You've got the radio later. I had the radio earlier. It's all very fun at the moment.
Yeah, you're more omnipresent than God, mate. Every time I turn on the radio, there's your dulcet tones making my day.
I am a millennial man trying to buy a home in London. That's what I am. I will take any overtime that's going, whether it's at the radio station or whether it's at Waitrose. Sign me up. I'm there. I will stack a shelf if I have to. It's fine with me.
Oh, you might get all sorts of offers after that, Calum. Be careful.
Right. Onwards, we are going to focus today really on the Home Office because of the, various issues and scandals that have been brought to light in the last, I would say, week or so. It all really kind of kicked off with a report that was literally kept locked away in a filing cabinet for a couple of years until the Times won a legal challenge to see it. And this report was looking at how dysfunctional the Home Office actually is. From there, I mean, take your pick of Home Office related stories. There's the migrant sex offender who was mistakenly released from jail. It turns out today that we now know he was paid £500 to be deported back to Ethiopia. He had threatened to submit a last-minute asylum claim to block his removal. There is the one-in, one-out migrant who was deported back to France as part of the deal before then crossing in a small boat and winding up back in the UK all over again. There are any number of issues to address within the Home Office. Kirsty, one of the quotes that's been used a lot in the last week is remembering John Reid saying the Home Office is not fit for purpose, which was 20-odd years ago. This report kind of concluded much the same thing, and we have had evidence galore of that over the last week, haven't we?
We certainly have. The not fit for purpose quote preceded what they call in government circles MOG, machinery of government change, which resulted in the criminal justice and prisons being moved off to its own department, the Ministry of Justice, and the rest of it staying in the Home Office. The view being that, to whittle it down to a greater focus on various different things would improve its performance, but that has not seemed to come to fruition. And if I was indulging in yet more machinery of government changes, because alongside obviously the problems with the Home Office is also the multiple problems that we have with our criminal justice system and our prison service, of which I know all too well, having served in the Ministry of Justice myself. I would move matters of policing into the Ministry of Justice as well, so that the Home Office could focus simply on border security, extremism, terrorism, and not be distracted by issues of policing. And policing is the kind of, and then you'd have an end-to-end criminal justice system, because what you input into the criminal justice system in terms of making changes to the law that lead to arrests, etc., from police officers, has a consequential result further down the stream in terms of the prison service. So I would move, and I never really understood why they didn't do this at the time, I would remove police and have a complete kind of refresh of the Ministry of Justice. Now, whether that does anything in terms of solving some of the fundamental problems that were highlighted by Nick Timothy's report is another matter. But what seems to, I've read the report, and one of the things that struck me about it was in particular this issue of looking inwards. And I think sometimes when you're in a kind of bunker department where you've just got a lot of incoming and very little of it is any good, and it's all kind of bad news coming at you every day, all day, you tend to bunker down and you look inward. And so this sense of defeatism that Nick Timothy identified, and this kind of lack of the ability to reach out to other departments and collaborate more, I think is a consequence of the sheer strain and scale of their work. And he uses an example, for argument's sake, the migrant hotels, of which we will probably talk more in a minute. But it is a nonsense to have an issue which is fundamentally about housing a section of people where you don't have a kind of cross collaborating arm into the Department of Housing, Local Government and Communities, because what we've got at the moment is a system that's not suitable for asylum seekers. It's not cost effective for the taxpayer, and it's not good for social cohesion. And yet, the Department for Communities, Housing and Local Government is almost completely absent from the conversation in terms of delivery on that. And I think that's just one small example of how it could be made to work better.
Joe, I do wonder what the kind of political implications are of all that we've learned in the last week. Loads of these stories are particularly potent, I think, electorally, whether it's the one in, one out migrant coming back to the UK. I mean, the cock-up that led to somebody who, it would appear, tried to get back into prison being released when he shouldn't have been released is absolutely monumental. It's huge. And then on the front page of the Times this morning, and indeed other newspapers, is news of an Afghan being arrested after a fatal stabbing of a man who was walking his dog. This Afghan has been arrested on suspicion of murder and attempted murder and remains in police custody. The Afghan in question arrived on the back of a lorry. I mean, this is just a week of politically radioactive stories as far as the Home Office is concerned.
Yeah, and I think the sort of the challenge is that a lot of people have said that if Labour, well, generally, if there is any hope of beating reform, it's essentially if Labour could sort out the problem of small boats, and if they could get to grips with the immigration sort of issue generally, whether that is, I mean, mainly illegal, but even legal migration, and making sure that the system works. There is a general view that is the one thing that is constantly going to be used against Keir Starmer, and to some extent that if you want to neutralise reform's appeal, that's the big thing that needs to be looked at. And the problem is these headlines just fuel a general feeling that the system is completely busted, that the government hasn't got a grip, hasn't got control, and given really the strength of feeling over the case, when you look at what happened around this guy being let out and left outside a prison, who's saying he doesn't know where to go and effectively being told where the train station was. When you look at the strength of feeling around his arrest in the first place and where we were last summer, this was not something that anyone could afford to get wrong. And then it was, it was sort of spectacularly badly handled. Not only what happened during the summer, but then subsequently letting him out when he wasn't due to be let out. So I think there is, I don't know, it's weird that, I mean, I can't remember how long ago this was, Kirsten, you might remember, but I'm pretty sure many years ago, like there was a minister for immigration who even sat at cabinet. I think it was Caroline Noakes for a while under the Tories. And, given how important the asylum system is, given how important some of the bit of the Home Office that is responsible for this major issue for the electorate, you do wonder why there isn't some sort of, extra effort, resource, oomph. I don't know what the word is, but I could almost see a reason that if you were the government, you would say, right, we're going to almost pull this out like a sort of Nightingale/COVID effort to then supercharge the effort around clearing the backlog, going after the gangs, and then dealing with what's in the UK in a more sort of demonstrable way. If you were to announce that, I know it's going to cost money, but it is going to be the biggest seismic issue for the next election, and it will change the face of how we operate as a country in such a monumental way if this government doesn't get a grip of it, that I don't know why there isn't more sort of emphasis on doing something much more seismic around government. But it sort of speaking, I've had a few conversations, one in particular, one former border force sort of expert, someone who was brought in under previous governments to look at this. I had a chat with him after I'd spoken to him on a radio show, and actually he was sort of despairing of all the missed opportunities that subsequent governments have had to actually really get a grip, and that it's kind of just something that's been like a political football that's been kicked around, that there's been different attempts to have a proper emphasis. There has been attempts to get money out of the Treasury for different programmes, different ways of managing parts of the process, and that everyone's kind of ducked it along the way. And it's just one of those things that now has rolled it. You can go back to people like John Reid probably being in charge, and you can see the snowball effect of whether it was mismanagement, whether it was a sort of indecision, whether it was just poor decisions made overall. You can see the snowball effect of things that haven't happened over time.
Yeah. I wonder, Kirsty, what your take is on the comms around this. So I'm quite struck today that Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary, has emerged saying, look, we pulled all the levers at our disposal. This guy who, the sex offending migrant, has been deported within a couple of days of him being re-detained, recaptured. And I'm sitting there going, well, hang on a second. If you've got all those levers to hand, why are you not pulling them every other day of the week in order to kind of get on top of this thing?
Well, comms-wise, the first thing has become a kind of default position of this government is to blame the previous government.
Yeah.
And in this case, there is some justification for that. One of the reasons we have so many illegal migrants being housed in hotels is because the government stopped processing them for asylum. The previous government stopped processing them for asylum to stop some of the pull factor. But having said that, this government came in. I was never a big fan, as you know, of the Rwanda policy because it wasn't up to the kind of scale of the problem. But nevertheless, without it even effectively being allowed to be piloted, that was stopped. There were plenty of people at the time who said enforcement is not the answer. I mean, trying to smash the gangs is like trying to play a multi-billion-pound game of whack-a-mole. This is a huge criminal enterprise that stretches across whole continents. And funnily enough, it has not worked. Deterrence is the issue here. And so, we are back to, what looks at the moment like trying to pull a lot of small levers or lots of, using lots of different kind of tiny tools in your toolkit. And the latest iteration of that being, let's set up army barracks and put migrants into those, which is, again, not up to the scale of the problem. There are something like 32,000 migrants currently in asylum-seeking hotels, and the 2 barracks that they're currently earmarked to be opened will only house about 900. So again, it's not really fit for the scale of the problem. We've discussed before whether you can have, rapid build, porter cabins, Nightingales type building processes. Again, it is problematic in terms of delivery for the same reason that, we are never going to get 1.5 million homes built in this parliament because, we don't have the skilled labour that we need to do it. We don't have the land. We don't have the planning permissions that we need in the leaders in planning. And quite often we don't actually have the raw materials that we need either. So I think they're in a bit of a bind. I think one of the issues that has fallen off the agenda but will come back is what decision will Shabana Mahmood take over Article 8, which is one of the many pieces of legal manoeuvring that people use to obfuscate and delay deportation. Article 8 is right to family life. And whilst Labour isn't in a position where both the Conservatives and Reform are at the moment, which is to remove us entirely from the ECHR, Shabana Mahmood is at least looking at a review of Article 8 to see whether we can disapply from that. There's also a break clause in 2026 on the migrant hotels. You're going to have to build an awful lot of alternative accommodation very, very quickly to allow you to really take advantage of that. So it's going to continue to be a toxic issue for quite some time to come.
I was speaking yesterday to the MP for the Highlands, where one barracks is going to be used to house asylum seekers, to get them out of hotels and to temporarily house asylum seekers. It's called Cameron Barracks. It's in Inverness, which is where I was born and brought up. And Angus Macdonald, no relation, is the MP for the area. And he said, look, this is not welcome here. This is not okay. This barracks is in a city centre location. It's about 10 minutes from the high street. It's got schools all around it. The hospital's not far away. It's right there. And that's an issue.
Yeah, I heard you on the radio say how close this was to the kind of town centre. And look, we've been down this road before. The Conservatives tried to pursue this policy idea, only to be met with fierce resistance, I might add, by the then Labour opposition. And what was it met? It was a bit of a wall of opposition to a proposal for converting a barracks in Lincolnshire. You're not going to get anything other than a wall of opposition to these two centres either. This one and the one, I think it's Crowborough in East Sussex.
Right.
So the idea that this is kind of an easy fix solution, it's certainly not hugely cheaper. The cheapest way, actually, to house these people pending their claims being processed is in houses of multiple occupation. But after the, what we saw yesterday in the tragic killing of a man just walking his dog that tried to break up a fight that had broken out, I think, the public would have concerns about moving people into houses of multiple occupation too. Yeah. But, it is going to continue to be probably the biggest drag on Labour's support from the right. And at the moment, we see a government that is in one breath trying to paint reform as racist for some of their policies and some of their language. And some of that may be justified, some of it may not. While at the same time, aping an awful lot of reforms policy solutions to this problem.
I think immigration, Joe, is one of the areas where I often think the next bit of a policy is missed out. And my example here is, sure, get it on the front pages of the papers and stuff that you're going to be moving asylum seekers out of hotels and into barracks. Fine. But why not also say, and we're going to put loads of Home Office officials at the barracks to process these people's claims in an efficient manner. It will not take longer than a week. And we're going to funnel people through the barracks. They're going to encounter officials and it's all going to be resolved that way. It's like the part 2 of the policy isn't quite there. And so it's just kind of shift the problem around and then not really address it. And maybe I'm naive and maybe I'm oversimplifying, but that's just where I get to with it, is that I just don't think they get to the part 2.
But I think this comes down to partly poor comms and partly expectation management. So, to go back to the point about smashing the gangs, it sounded like an incredibly sensible approach. And it was described as being, we're going to go upstream, we're going to find these people and we're going to deal with it. And we will stop these people from exploiting these individuals that want to come over. And it was all done in such a way that it sounded very simple. And it sounded like something that was, it had a nice catchphrase. And it all sounded like it was going to be very easy to do because that's how it was sold to us during the election. And this is a similar issue. The point is, it's not even about really what part 2 of the policy is. It's about saying you're trying to say to the public, you're announcing it as if the public are going to be pleased that you're going to put people into these areas that are potentially disused or, they're sort of maybe even in a state of disrepair in some communities. But back to your original point about what do you do in an area, the issue is, it doesn't matter whether you relax planning rules. It doesn't matter whether you say you're going to build a load of homes. A lot of people don't like things happening in their area. They don't like change that affects their way of life or that threatens their way of life as they see it. Repeatedly I've seen MPs that have been opposing prisons being built in their patch because they don't want them there. They don't want these people in our community, even though there's, maybe significant security, whatever. They're not people wandering around, but they just don't want it. They don't want it there. Whereas if you say to them, do you want a John Lewis or a Waitrose? They'll, they'll put their arms up and they'll welcome you and help you stack the shelves. There is a thing about what it means for your community that selling the policy in the way that they're selling it isn't going to work. So the principle is your taxpayer money, your taxes will not go towards hotels, which is a bad deal. But at the same time, you might be one of the people that has these people living 500 yards from where you live.
Yeah.
And actually, I would probably argue that if you polled it, I reckon more people would pay the money and have them not in their community than not pay the money and have them in their community.
Yeah.
That's, it's about what people perceive as a risk or a threat to their way of life and their communities. And when we have had these significant issues, even if people that are housed in these barracks cause no problem whatsoever, given the protests that happened around the hotels, you might even just be fearful of a protest happening about these people being there, even if they'd cause no problem in your community. But you might still think there is going to be disruption from them being there, even if you don't have any objection to people that are in that situation being in your area. You might just be worried about the protest that could come with it. So the reality is that I don't think there is an understanding of the strength of feeling about the issue and the strength of feeling about, I don't know, Kirsty, I don't know if you'd call it fear. There's always that element, isn't it, of differences, what things might mean, the change that could come, the risk to your standard, normal family life, community life. I just think people won't want it. I think that's the thing that the government haven't really thought about. They thought, I almost feel like they thought it was a good news story, but actually they haven't thought about what the reaction's going to be.
It's not peculiar to England either. I mean, you look at what's happened in Dublin, where there has been someone in an asylum seeker hotel who has allegedly committed an attack against a 10-year-old girl. Now, that led to riots. We've not mercifully seen that in this country since Southport, but also we've had asylum and migrant hotels attacked in countries like Sweden. And both Ireland and Sweden are kind of inherently more left wing, quote unquote, than the UK necessarily is. So it's not peculiar to us, and it's not a peculiar problem to us. What no one seems to have really grappled with, and what I struggle to understand is, is this working for anybody anywhere in a comparable way that we can learn from other countries and import those lessons? Now, one of those was supposed to be the kind of one in, one out hokey cokey dance that we're now doing with France. But again, these aren't, revelations in terms of how these things are rolled out. It was blindingly obvious that if you don't include in your contract that once you send someone back to France, they have to put them in a detention centre and process them, of course they're going to get back on a boat, as the Iranian guy did last week, and come straight back over the channel.
Yeah. Your thoughts on that would be very welcome, actually. This kind of perception issue, the messaging issue. I'm quite struck just by how much it has become a week all about the Home Office and related policy. You can, of course, WhatsApp us on 0333 404 6507. Start your message with the word Whitehall, or you can email hello@whitehallsources.com. Drop us a WhatsApp as you're listening. Watch us on YouTube as well. You can watch these episodes in full, and you can find our clips on X and on TikTok to have a little scroll through as well. We are going to talk about income tax next. Stay with us. This is the Whitehall Sources podcast. Now then, Sir Keir Starmer has refused to rule out raising income tax, national insurance or VAT in the budget. So then, it is possible that Labour will breach one of its main manifesto pledges. Perish the thought. Joe, this kind of kicked off at PMQs today, where I actually thought Kemi Badenoch deserves a little bit of credit for how she structured the first couple of questions on this. she asked in question 1, will they be raising either any of these, income tax, national insurance or VAT? And so Keir Starmer sort of, let's be real, fudged something of an answer. At which point Kemi Badenoch was able to stand up and say, well, this is totally different to what you told me in July, where you said that you would be sticking to your manifesto promises. So the fact that the answers weren't the same, weren't identical, gives her license to beat him around the head with it. Now, I feel like we knew this was coming, but this feels like the Prime Minister has basically confirmed it, hasn't he, Joe?
I mean, he's come incredibly close to it in terms of we're in the sort of the equivalent of silly season, right? Pre-budget, this is what happens. It's always a kind of, can you catch somebody out? And we have endless interviews where you ask somebody and they say, I can't possibly comment because clearly I don't know what's in the budget. And, you know, it's all Rachel Reeves and the Treasury that are running this. And so you get this sort of cat and mouse game that goes on. But I've got to say, you know, you've got to hand it to Kemi that she actually asked it was a specific trap that she was setting, and he walked into it because he wouldn't have thought, you know, he wouldn't have thought to have answered with exactly the same wording. I don't think anyone in the government has thought about that. They've been sort of moving slightly. Language has loosened a bit. It's moved in different directions in terms of the way that they've been describing. It is nowhere near the discipline that they had before the election, around what they wouldn't do.
Yeah.
And so it was a relatively simple trap that was set that he walked into. And, you know, it's already resulted in, I've seen a couple of splashes on news websites suggesting that Keir Starmer has failed to say that he will protect or that these rises will not happen. And so ultimately, you know, it's probably, I think it would be chalked up as a win for Kemi that she's got him. This is the kind of stuff the leader of the opposition should be doing. It doesn't change a lot fundamentally. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen anyway. She's not going to stop it by the cat being let out of the bag if that's what this is. But we are simply, you know, we are locked into the washing machine cycle of going round this, you know, where it comes around. Someone says something, shows a bit of leg, and we all get a bit excited, and then we wait again and see what happens. But yeah, that's where we are.
You've got to take the wins in this game, if a bit of legs on display, I suppose. Kirsty, how are you reading Starmer's response today? And also, I suppose, Kemi Badenoch's strategy today, which was to compare answer with answer, which I thought was quite sharp.
Well, first of all, it serves Keir Starmer right for the soft bigotry of low expectation. And whilst given some of Kemi's parlous performances from the off, his patronising treatment of her is in one level understanding and understandable. Look, but she's clearly worked very, very hard on upping her game. And the last 3 or 4 performances at the dispatch box have been pretty solid performances from her. So if I were Keir Starmer, I'd be less patronising and a bit more on the ball because clearly she's raised her game and you know he's going to have to start thinking a little bit round the corners on PMQs in a way that he hasn't, frankly, hitherto had to. The interesting thing about this is that, you know, whilst it is on one level a trap and he walked into it, etc., on another, it doesn't, you know, it is walking Labour down the path and the journey they want to take us on in any event. You know, we had that a couple of weeks ago where that curious language about the manifesto commitment stands, which is in terms, so just to remind people, you know, 3/4 of the Treasury's kind of tax take comes from 3 big taxes: national insurance, VAT, and income tax. And going into the election, one of the things that they allowed themselves to be boxed into a corner by Conservatives and the media, asking them to rule out that tax and rule out that tax. And of course they did. They boxed themselves into ruling out all 3 of those big 3. Then, of course, we had the obligatory performative look at the books, get the smelling salts out and say, oh my God, what a mess we've been left with, a £22 billion black hole. Well, okay. There is no doubt that there probably was a black hole. We could argue about the scale of it. And at least, you know, 9 billion of that, I think the IFS rule wasn't really there. wasn't really in existence. So whether you're talking about, a 10 billion or a 22 billion black hole, you're talking about a black hole. And then, of course, we had a budget last year where Rachel Reeves raised £40 billion worth of taxes, including 24 billion on businesses, which is a curious move for a government that says it's hell-bent on growth. That has had consequences for the government and for growth and for productivity. And sure as eggs, even though she said after that budget to the CBI, I won't be coming back for more, she's having to. And so we've had this kite flying over a number of weeks now about, we're looking at, whether to tax kind of legal firms and, doctors, etc. And little bits there and bits there. And eventually I think they've just come to the conclusion that it's all too bitty and we're just going to have to break the manifesto pledge and raise income taxes. And the only question seems to be now, so as we're kind of weirdly adjusting to something that will be a profound breach of their manifesto commitment and will almost certainly wreck Rachel Reeves' career and probably take Keir Starmer in the long run with her. So let's not underestimate how serious a breach this would be. Not since I think the tuition fees vote fast by the Liberal Democrats going into
Really?
coalition. Yeah, I mean, if you
That's
have spent,
huge.
it is huge. If you spent the last 2 years saying absolutely not, we won't tax working people, we won't touch the big three, and then you go, actually, the budget black hole is bigger than we thought. Brackets, quite a lot of that is on them. Some of it's inherited, but quite a lot of it is on the decisions that they have made. You are effectively going into a budget and saying we can't get even minor welfare cuts past our own parliamentary party. We've U-turned in the face of, winter fuel, and we're probably going to U-turn on the two-child benefit cap, and we couldn't get a relatively modest £5 billion of welfare spending through. And so we're going to whack at least 1p, possibly even 2, and freeze the thresholds, which will drag more people into paying a higher rate. You think that that's going to be forgivable? No, absolutely not.
Yeah,
It will destroy her career, and in turn, it will take his with him.
Joe, what do you think about that?
I think it's I don't know where they're going. I don't know where they're going to go. Like I can remember having conversations in the election last year, and plenty of people were saying there is no way that they can stick to the sort of line that they will look after working people. Like there's just the phraseology, what it encapsulated, and because it almost goes back to sort of the conversation we were having earlier about expectations and what you class as a tax that affects you as a working person. And that whole phrase about who are working people. And you might remember there were sort of a few interesting squirmy interviews where it was kind of, well, are you suggesting that's just people of a certain income that fall into that bracket? But, there are plenty of people that work, and there are, you'll remember Theresa May and her jams, the just about managings. There are plenty of people that don't live a particularly extravagant lifestyle, but live in
We're all
certain
jams now, Joe.
well, but the reality is when the cost of living goes up, when energy prices go up, when certain things in your life change and the touch points change, the bills that you've got change for lots of different reasons. When you start tinkering with council tax and all sorts of other things, you will ultimately affect a lot of people. And so, this very broad brush statement that they made, we're going to smash the gangs, we're not going to put taxes up on working people. They were probably very effective when they focus grouped them. They were probably very good when they all sat around in a room and, were late at night eating their McDonald's or whatever they did and sort of wrote things on a whiteboard. It all sounded great. But in reality, everyone's got a different interpretation of what those things are.
Yeah.
And then when you actually do boil it down to a few key taxes, you work out that you've boxed yourself in so much that you are going to have to break it. Like, I just don't see what the way around it is.
Yeah.
And when you've then clobbered businesses in the way that they did with the NIC stuff, you start messing around with thresholds, whether it's VAT, whether it's, even on certain duties that appear and you perhaps freeze them, that actually ends up being a tax because of what they're frozen in line with compared to where they were, that you actually do cause a significant amount of problems. And then there is a shortfall that has to be made up in some way. And so whether it's, you go back to the basics of you don't employ people, you don't expand your business, these are all things that then fundamentally, when you're back in the washing machine or the hamster wheel or whatever we call it, the circle of life when it comes to productivity and wealth creation means that you screw the very people that are going to be the wealth creators that will create the jobs. Therefore, if you don't create the jobs, there's less jobs on the market. If you can't raise people's wages, people aren't earning as much, they can't keep up with the cost of living. And then fundamentally you get no growth. And the bottom line is you still need growth, right? It is a doom loop. It is. I mean, there are no upsides. And quite frankly, if you listen to Labour MPs who talk about how catastrophic just winter fuel was on the doorstep, what on earth do they think the reaction is going to be to the stuff that they're probably going to end up doing in the budget? Like, I mean, you're talking fatal blows for careers. I think Kirsty's right. Like, it is going to look like a monumental betrayal. People were complaining to MPs that they used 200 quid a year. And that £200, they were outraged it was being taken away from them. They saw it as a right. Some of these people didn't use it for fuel costs. There was a Labour MP that told me they'd received in their inbox someone that had the balls to complain to their MP that they couldn't get the money that they used to use for their grandchildren's Christmas presents, because that's what they used that 200 quid for. They didn't even use it for the cost of living, the cost of energy. They used it as that was towards their grandkids' Christmas presents. And they thought they were entitled to it, and they were outraged it was being taken away from them. They had the guts to even message that blatantly and tell their MP they thought that was a reason to keep it. Now, if you think people are going to get that exercised about something like that, now I know there are plenty of people that did need that money, but even the people that didn't need it were willing to moan. What do you think you're going to do when you start tinkering or making some seismic changes to really major taxes?
And you hit on just the right word there, Joe. This will be Labour's great betrayal.
Yeah.
It will be seen as unforgivable. And anyone that does focus groups now will tell you that a word that is frequently pinned on Keir Starmer is that he is a liar. So that is before you go back on your great manifesto promises. Genuinely, I cannot think of a more spectacular and more damaging U-turn since Liberal Democrats promised to rule out, who weren't even kind of the majority partner in the government, campaigned on abolishing tuition fees and then allowed that to be the cost for which they bought themselves a place around the cabinet table.
And they're still paying the price.
Yeah, it took the Liberal Democrats years to overcome that betrayal. You managed to turn around to people on the back of promising not to tax their income and then breaching that promise 2 years down the line, in large part because of the decisions that you have taken that have made a bad inheritance worse. That is unforgivable. It is absolute political suicide.
I just want to throw in comments from Luke Trill, who was on this podcast last week, director of More in Common, the pollsters. He says, just this afternoon, the more I think about it, the more I think treating a potential break of the pledge not to raise income tax, national insurance, VAT as just another unpopular decision is a big mistake. The then two main parties fought a whole election framed by their promises not to do it, and the implication for political trust of breaking it may be deep. Picking up on some of the themes we've been talking about here. This isn't a sin of omission, says Luke. The promise was explicit. You can argue the promise was misguided, and there was always, he reckons, room for Labour to pledge to reverse the Jeremy Hunt national insurance cuts and still win with a hefty majority and room for manoeuvre. But it was the promise. Now, this is the part. He says, the only way to break it without a severe trust penalty is to convince people the situation has changed so dramatically that it has to. The Sunak national insurance rise of 2022 was swallowed because of COVID. Now, if that is the precedent, if that is the benchmark, then I just don't think there's any argument that comes close to that, is there? That this isn't a moment like that. This isn't even the kind of the argument around Brexit's to blame for all of this, I don't think comes close to being pandemic scale level of understanding from the electorate that things have to be exceptional.
Well, and here is the problem for them in trying to lay the blame on an external factor, is they're trying to say that something has fundamentally changed between last year, when they could hold their manifesto commitment, and this year when they can't. That isn't Ukraine. Ukraine hasn't got any worse. You know, we haven't had a fresh pandemic. And to lay it on Brexit when actually the statistical evidence and data shows that the worst impacts of Brexit are now receding, not getting worse, it's not going to fool anybody. Brexit didn't happen last year. Next year will be a decade since we voted for it. Has it had an impact on the economy? Absolutely. But within that decade, businesses have accommodated it, changes have been made, new alliances have been formed. You know, and business goes on. And actually, like I say, the data shows that the impact of Brexit is lessening on the economy in Britain, not getting worse. So no one's going to buy that argument. And there is literally the only difference between the impact, you know, the external factors of last year and this year is the impact of Rachel Reeves' £24 billion tax levy on businesses. That is what has caused the decline and the downgrading that we saw again this year, this week on productivity. That is what has widened her black hole, and that is what has made an incredibly bad situation infinitely worse.
And actually, politically, what they should have done was broken the pledge last year and then said it was all because of the Tories. Whereas a year in, Kirsty's right, it looks like you've contributed towards the problem and now you're breaking it.
Yes.
They should have done it and then almost given them what they need is, you know, with every government is you need the period before your re-election to write everything that you've had to do that's unpopular, do all the unpopular stuff at the start, and then you get yourself through so you're in a better position so you can promise all sorts before an election and make everyone happy again. But instead, they didn't do that last year. They instead did the sort of botched winter fuel stuff, which just upset everyone and didn't actually make them anywhere near enough money to justify the sort of outrage that it caused. And so they've sort of ended up in the worst of both worlds, really.
Yeah. Thanks, both. The budget build-up continues, although we are now less than a month away from the budget, so it's not going to continue for too much longer. It's been long enough already, let's be honest.
And very excitingly, we get to do a live event where we get to talk about it all.
Yes.
So that's even better, isn't it? Where you can have all this wonderful insight in person.
Exactly that. So if you go to whitehallsources.com/live, you can get your free ticket to come along and see us at the budget preview. We are heading to the headquarters of Make UK, the voice of British manufacturers, to preview the budget in association with Ruud Peterson UK. We've got a brilliant panel ready to take questions and to analyse where we're at and what the options may or may not be. We're doing this on the 18th of November. It's only a couple of weeks away, actually. Scary. So if you'd like to be there are still a few seats left. Then go to whitehallsources.com/live and join us, the three of us, plus our guests on the evening of 18th of November. The doors will open at 6:30, by the way, so it's kind of after work time, so you should be able to make it along. It's in London. Go to whitehallsources.com/live for your essential budget preview. Joe and Kirsty, thank you both very much indeed. We will drop into your feed on the Whitehall Sources podcast next week. As long as you've pressed subscribe, you'll be first to hear our episode, and we look forward to chatting to you then.